What if you skipped PR entirely because you assumed it was for companies bigger, more funded, or more famous than yours? Most small business owners do, and most of them are wrong. Today's guest tells us how it is, right? You do not necessarily need a publicist, a six-figure budget, or a Shark Tank appearance to earn real media coverage. What you need is, drum roll, you need a strategy. And that's exactly what we'll be tackling today on Strategy Talks. This is Strategy Talks. We'll be right back.
Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Dorien Morin-van Dam.
Hello, everybody. This is Dorien Morin-van Dam. I am your host of Strategy Talks, and I want to welcome all of you today. We are live today, and it's a special day. I didn't even tell my guest. Today's June 16th, and it's exactly 18 years ago that I became an American citizen. So it's a special day for me. I actually didn't remember that date until halfway through the day, and I've been meaning to post on social media, but now I get to tell all of you 18 years with an American citizenship. So I'm very, very grateful for that opportunity in 2008 and that I carry that citizenship with me forward. So I wanted to welcome all of you to Strategy Talks. If you're here live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, or on YouTube, I want to welcome you. If you watch this on the replay, as always, if you have questions for myself or my upcoming guests, leave those questions in the comment. Feel free to tag us and we'll be happy to answer them. Last but not least, I want to welcome all of you who are listening to Strategy Talks as a podcast. So now it's time to bring onto the stage with me my friend Mickie Kennedy. How are you today, Mickie?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And we're going to talk about PR. Now, we were just talking in the green room about PR and that it's kind of what old is new again. We're kind of having this moment in PR. Is that how you feel? Or is that something that we shouldn't even be talking about because it should have been relevant all along?
I kind of feel like it should have been relevant all along. I think that it goes through ebbs and flows as far as how PR works. But at the end of the day, journalists aren't really out researching original stories predominantly. They are being delivered content either by email or by pitches from either people they know, like publicists they have a relationship with, or blindly receiving stuff from publicists. But largely, they're turning to the wires to look for potential stories. I had mentioned that the E and E releases when I began, I guess that's 28 years ago, was for email. And I was emailing press releases, and they've become largely ineffective because media databases have become pretty commonplace. And for $5,000 to $15,000 a year, you get access to hundreds of thousands of emails, and people just talk themselves into sending off-targeted press releases. So email is really not the best way to reach journalists any longer. They've become email blind to their inboxes, especially national media. And so the wire has become more and more important because unlike email, it's very clean. They can log in, see their industry feed, which they could customize, like by make sure you pin press releases to the top that mention this keyword because that's really important to me, or exclude press releases from the feed that mention a certain topic because I don't cover that. Like maybe I do fashion, but maybe not retail fashion. So if it mentions J.C. Penney or certain retailers, you can go ahead and exclude those press releases. And so the chaos of the email inbox is nowhere to be found with these newswires. And in the U.S., it's predominantly a duopoly. It's a Business Wire and PR Newswire, and they're both very expensive, close to $2,000 for a 600-word or 700-word press release. And it's so expensive because it is largely a duopoly. And it is different than other wires you may have heard of, like the Associated Press or AP or Reuters. They don't disseminate press releases. The Associated Press, they write articles. They'll use press releases. They're out looking for stories, but everything that they run is written by them, and it's mostly licensed. So you'll see in your local newspaper, it might say AP in front of the story, which just means rather than one of their editors spending time writing that story, they just pulled it off the AP wire, and they pay a fee to the Associated Press.
All right. Okay. So there was a lot of good stuff in this. Man, you're like right outside of the gauge. You're giving us all kinds of information, but this really sets the scene because now we know if you want to write a 600-word press release and submit it there, it's $2,000. So if you're a small business, that's a huge chunk of a marketing budget, right? Yes. I mean, that's a lot of money, and that's for one story that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be picked up. So then what do we do?
So we partnered with PR Newswire about close to 15 years ago. So all of our press releases go out nationally through PR Newswire. It also goes to the appropriate trade categories with PR Newswire. And you're given the opportunity to do local saturation, which is like a mind bender. It's like, well, if it's going out nationally, doesn't it reach local media? Well, a lot of local media say, I'm only interested in local media. So they're excluded from these national distribution sends. But if you select and add on to your release local saturation, it will go to those journalists who've indicated, I'm only interested in local news. So if you're like a Chicago business and you want to go out nationally, but you also want to make sure that your local media, the business journals who cover local Chicago companies, and the people at the newspaper who cover local businesses, by adding that local saturation, you'd also go to them as well. And you don't have to pay $2,000 to go out through e-releases. We're about a third, or if you come in through our new customer special, about a quarter of the price. So it's a huge cost savings coming through and working with us. The caveat is you can't be a publicly traded company or a big giant firm that their salespeople would be interested in working with. So we are what we call found money to PR Newswire. Most of our clients have a budget of less than $3,000 a year for PR, and their salespeople would not reach out to anybody unless they thought they could at least spend $20,000 plus with PR Newswire. So, in aggregate, we do represent a lot of these small businesses and entrepreneurs. So we're moving over 10,000 press releases a year. So it is certainly a lot of volume, and we do write big checks to PR Newswire. But it does allow us to get a really great price that we're able to pass along to small businesses.
Oh, that's really fantastic. And it's interesting because you and I were talking in the green room that, I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with small businesses, and, I've worked with some people who've paid money, big money for PR. But I haven't heard anybody talk about your company where this is do you consider it like do it yourself?
We do. I consider it completely a DIY.
Okay.
I provide a lot of resources and tools and what's working. The truth about press releases and even those that go out over PR Newswire and Business Wire is probably 97% of them fail to get any earned media. And that's what we call it when you get an article written about you, or an interview, or you have an appearance on TV, because there's so many different mediums for getting your content out there. And so only 3% are succeeding. And, with those odds, it doesn't seem like it's in your favor. But I have noticed that within the 3% of press releases that are getting earned media, there's a lot of patterns, and there's a lot of things that are applicable to anybody. So I tell people, never, if you're going to do a press release, you really should commit to a PR campaign. And so one press release is not a magic bullet, but if you do a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases, which I think is like a minimum PR campaign, you don't have to do them in all within the same period. You can spread them out. Maybe the cadence of your business might be every other month, but at the minimum, you should be doing it at least quarterly. And, if you do strategic types of releases among the 3% that are getting picked up, you're going to have a much higher likelihood that of those 6 to 8 releases, maybe 1, 2, maybe even a little bit more will generate earned media. And so that means you're going to have a lot of failures. But what happens with earned media? One article in Waste News, which is a trade magazine for one of my clients, resulted in 2 cities in Australia reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, do you build facilities abroad?" And they go, "Oh yeah, we have projects in India and a few other places in Asia." And so he ended up building 2 facilities for these cities in Australia. $30-40 million deals from a $400 press release that got picked up in one article. And so that's a wild example, but we did a press release for a very short-lived initiative during the pandemic as a courtesy to help them out. It was called the Dining Bond Initiative, and I have it as a case study on my website. And it was basically like you could nominate your favorite local restaurant, and if the volunteers were able to reach them, you could give money that would help them during this 2 weeks of flattening the curve that we went through that turned into a few years. And it was sort of backed by a dining bond or gift certificate type of thing. And so if you had a favorite restaurant that you went to on your anniversaries or something like that, and you're worried about them, it was a way to sort of, empower you to give money and help them out. Generated over $10 million in revenue, over 100 articles that it got picked up, and it got picked up in big places, but it also got picked up in probably over 100 local papers as well. And I think it did well because it was positive news at a time where there was negative and uncertain outlooks. And also I think that it was empowering. We were sort of like we were just sent home and we didn't have much power, but here we could make a difference on a small scale. And again, it was we did it for free, but it would have been like a $400 press release, and it literally generated in excess of $10 million. The thing is, it's a bit unpredictable. So marketing people hate it. They're like, what's
ROI?
Yeah, what's the ROI? I've had someone say this went to thousands of journalists and it didn't result in an article. That's impossible. And I'm like,
right.
Well, no, it's the norm. And
right.
What you got to focus on is making your press releases more strategic. And one of the easiest things you can do, I think the most common press release we get is a product or service launch. And it could also be an update of a product that you're sort of presenting as a new launch with that new version of the product or service, and they fall flat. And I tell people, I know it was important to you, but a journalist reading this, and they're gatekeepers. Their most valuable asset is their audience. How was it important to their audience? Not really. And was there something you could have done to make it important to their audience, or something their audience would want to read or learn about? And that's where you sometimes have to, I say, backdoor or reverse engineer your approach. And one of the easiest ways and most counterintuitive ways to change that type of press release is, rather than have the press release and a bunch of features, which tends to be the case, is have the announcement and then put the spotlight on someone who beta tested it. And, like maybe you have a logistics software solution and you're like, hey, the failure rate in our industry for new companies is 63% in the first 5 years they fail. And here's a company that is 3 years old, never had a profit. So it looks like they're going to be one of those casualties. 6 months into using our product, beta testing it, they're now projected to have their first net profit at the end of this year. And then you have a quote by them saying something along the lines of, we always thought if we just won more bids, we would become profitable. And what this software showed us is that we're only ever going to be profitable if we are using intelligence in our invoicing and know when to quit bidding and focus on projects that are going to bring profit. And, something like that, little smaller, little sexier, more active verbs in that quote. But, that is going to all of a sudden bring up a story arc. Journalists love story arcs.
That was going to be my question, the story. So how deep do we dig and how personal do we get? Because when I talk in small businesses, I live in rural Vermont, right? And so there are lots of human interest stories here. Is that something, tying that to a product or service launch, does that make sense? Or is it the story of you as a business owner, why you're successful, or does it, or an anniversary? Like,
so
what is it? What stories do people like? Stories do journalists like?
I think that stories that cut through and show a bit of humanity are the ones that work well. And it is a little bit of a balancing act. You want it to come across as genuine, and sometimes the stories can be in the case of that spotlighting a customer, you don't have to bring a lot into it, but the fact that the company was failing for 3 years, now it looks like they've overcome that by using your software. It shows it better illustrates why people need your solution than you just announcing a bunch of features, and really demonstrates that. So if you have an interesting story about why you launched your company or something like that, and it's been a while, it's probably harder to make that the focus of a press release. But at the end of every release, we have what's usually called a boilerplate, and it's about section. And usually it's a paragraph at the end that's about the company or about the individual, if it's an author or somebody, an individual doing a press release. And that's a great place to sort of incorporate a little bit of the lore and the little bit of the story of like, hey, this is who we are, our elevator pitch. And I founded the company after, taking a first class flight, and the singer Cher and I were talking, and she said, I think that would be a great business. And I do have an experience with Cher, and I actually talked to her once years ago. Her personal assistant what created a business, and Cher was her biggest cheerleaders, and that person got picked up that year as the minority entrepreneur of the year in a magazine. And she was able to mention Cher in the press release, which is, it's kind of hard. The Newswire doesn't want like implied celebrity endorsements. So we had to get a letter from Cher's attorney to send over that they authorized the use of her name and stuff like that. But, things like that are just weird. You're just like, oh, here's someone's personal assistant who's founding a sort of a gift related business, and had this endorsement by that person. What are other, what's your why? It doesn't have to be like celebrities. It doesn't have to be something crazy. It could just be something that easily makes your business relatable. In the early 2000s, every story that came out about eBay mentioned that the person who started the company, it was to help sell their either girlfriend or fiance's Pez collection. And as a developer, that's how they approached it. Is like, well, I'm going to build a website where you're going to auction these off, and we're going to try the internet. And all of a sudden, eBay was launched. Turns out later that came out that it was not true, that a PR company built that story. But it got a lot of mileage because it immediately got you to all of a sudden think about an auction platform. What could I sell? It made it like, oh, you could take a Pez collection and sell these little pieces of plastic individually. And it also made you think that, oh, these little things that you wouldn't think have much value, little yard sale things or something. It really cut through a lot and made it very relatable. And I think that's why that story stuck, and everybody, incorporated that into their articles. I had a client who was pretty successful, and they had won an award, and they just wanted to get the word out how great they were. And I had talked with them once before, and I remember they had said when they originally founded their business, before they had a big giant warehouse, they were doing fulfillment in their garage, and they kind of had to cut Thanksgiving short and have the whole family out there help with fulfillment. And I really challenged them to, let's incorporate that into a press release. And they were like, wouldn't that be embarrassing? Why would you want to get that out there? And they ended up getting a 2-page article in Inc. magazine. And that was the intro of their story of like, several years ago, they basically had to cancel Thanksgiving just to do fulfillment. And today they have, they're very successful. They have $1 million warehouse, and, and they're like, even they were like, why did they pick that? You were right. And I said, because it's so relatable.
It's relatable.
Entrepreneurs have these stumbling blocks. We all know that sometimes we have to, dig up our sleeves and call on friends and family to come in and help a little bit, and so it is something that I think just translated well, and Inc. magazine recognized that. There's a reason that every time someone does go on Shark Tank, they don't just open with their numbers and their business. They try to get vulnerable a little bit. I was sitting there, my father had just died, and we had this little hobby thing that we used to take out to flea markets, and I just thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could build a business around that? And it's like, oh, I want you to succeed.
I know. The storytelling, and it's funny because I never really thought about how close PR and those stories are to what we do in marketing. It's just really concentrating and on the press release. But I mean, those are the stories we tell in marketing as well. I had a client who owns a security company. So they do security and commercial alarms. And the reason she got picked up by the local news and then got picked up by national news and then the BBC is the reason she started her company with her husband is that she was working for in a jewelry store and begged the owners to install a security system, and they wouldn't. And then she
robbed them just to prove her point.
She got robbed at gunpoint. And so it was totally traumatic. She survived. And that story is why, and that incident is why they started their security company. And they're all for panic buttons. And, that's why they do commercial also, not just home. But it was a personal experience. And once she shared that story on her blog, it got picked. And I sent it to a couple of journalists because I was working with them on social media, but it got picked up locally, and then it got into national. And then even the BBC picked it up as, survival story. So yes, if you have a personal story, if there's a reason you start a company, this is great. And of course we can use it in marketing too, but PR, that's awesome. So I read something about you, Mickie, that you said surveys are good. Can you explain that a little bit? What is the thing about surveys, and how can small businesses use that?
So I would love to take credit for it, but I actually have a customer, for about 10 years now, they've been doing surveys. And when they first went in business and were doing press releases, I would look at their website and I was just like, just seems like it's a link farm. They did a lot of little top 10 list of like, here's the best graphic design software, or here's the best CAD software for architects, top 10 list. Here's the best, CRM for email marketing and stuff like that. And then, they were really committed to PR. I don't know why, but they would get occasional hits, but it was like 1 out of every 10, 12 press releases. And then they did a survey, and they picked one of the niches that they did and talked about that market, and it got 8 to 14 articles. And then they did it for another little vertical. So they were doing 20 to 30 press releases a year on all these surveys. And they turned the survey into an annual survey. And, as a result, almost all of these articles had links to their website and the resource page, because the focus of the press releases is on basically one survey question. What was the biggest aha or surprise from that survey? But you build out a page on your website where you have all the survey results and questions you asked, and you can expand upon that. But they got links from all of these verticals. So now this link farm is getting all of these authority links. And today, they don't even have to do PR. They get called every time there's a consolidation in any of these little verticals. They are just magnets for the media. And it all started because they elevated themselves as thought leaders by just doing surveys. And that's all it takes is you just do a survey. And the approach that I've seen them use is, they don't build Rolodexes of people to survey. They just approach small and independent trade associations because there's so many in every vertical. Even in my space, PR, we all know the big ones because they have the conferences. Avoid them because they don't need you. But there's a lot of verticals. There's ones that represent, geographics or, African American PR firms, led PR firms, or, whatever. But there's also ones that are like PR firms of 50 employees or less. That's predominantly, 85% of the market. So that would be a great one to reach out to. And all you have to do is reach out to them and say, hey, I've created this survey at SurveyMonkey. Here's a link. Could you send this to your members? We're looking for at least 100 responses to be statistically relevant. And in exchange for doing this, I will feature you in a press release we'll be issuing nationally over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. At the time, the first time we asked, they say yes, because nobody knows about these people. They usually have 1,000 or 2,000 members, but they don't have the recognition in the industry that everyone does. So they see this as an opportunity for them. And when I coach people through this, almost everybody gets 6 to 12 articles. Individual articles from one press release. And the least we've ever had is 4. And that was for someone in a very specialized biometrics industry. And they were thrilled. They were like, there's only 4 publications in our industry, Mickie, and we got all 4. So I think we're happy. So, and the great thing is you could just repeat this. You do this annually if you want to. And it's the easiest way to be recognized as a leader in your industry. When that client, I like I said, I just considered them a link farm, and today they're considered authorities in so many little verticals and market spaces. And so that is something that anyone can do, and it's not as involved as you think it is. You want to ask thoughtful questions, maybe something that's timely. It could be industry specific. It could be around how AI is influencing your industry. It could be about, work culture change post-pandemic. Are you having problems with the work culture, or are you finding that people still don't want to come into the office, or, are you having challenges around that? And so these are all great questions, but they're also, there could be blind spots, things that the media is missing that if you brought up in a question and you had some numbers behind it, the media would find irresistible. I've had that work for certain industries. One was the carpet industry. And I had a carpet company in New Jersey. I can't think of a more non-newsworthy business. They just 20 some years installing carpet, and people like them. And we did something where it brought up how their biggest enemy was the big box home improvement stores. And nobody in their trade publications had talked about it. And so we brought that blind spot into a conversation. It wasn't through a survey, but it was identifying something the media has been missing, and the media just ate it up. They got picked up in over 10 trade publications in that first press release. And by the time the year was up, of doing press releases, of which the first 6 months nothing happened because we didn't find something the media was interested in. They had gotten over 20 articles, and their local paper and New Jersey Magazine, which was an important magazine for them. But at the end of the day, I was like, most of your clients aren't reading the trade publications. How's that help you? And they said, well, we have this brag book that we put together. We print out all of the clips. And when our people go to give a quote in someone's home, we open it and say, we may not come in the cheapest, but we have a strong reputation. We've identified a lot of gaps in the industry with low cost providers like the Home Depot and Lowe's of the world. And they just open through the book. Here we are in Floor Trade Weekly. Here we are in this publication, local paper. And they said maybe it adds at most 2 minutes to the conversation. Somebody might thumb through it, but all of a sudden they started closing 17% more of these consultations by adding that credibility and authority to the process, the sales process. And, that's something that you can do with the authority that's created with PR and getting that earned media.
Wow. Mickie, I have like another 8 questions lined up, but we have no more time. So I'm just going to acknowledge that you are a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you being with us today. And what we're just going to have to do for everybody who was here live, I know some people jumped in and out, and people who are going to listen to this or watch a replay, is going to let them know how they can connect with you, because I suspect that when we go to your website, there's going to be lots of information there for do-it-yourself press releases, all this 28 years of knowledge and more that people can use to get themselves some earned media. And I think it's fantastic. So tell us where you are most active and how can people connect with you?
Right. So the website's ereleases.com. All the social media is on the lower right, including my direct LinkedIn. That's a great place to reach me personally. I do have a free masterclass. It's less than an hour long. It's an hour-long video. And it goes through the 3% of press releases that do get picked up. So if you go through that and brainstorm half a dozen ideas of press releases you could do, that would be a great place to start. And it's completely free. And that's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN.
Okay. And I'll make sure that link is in the show notes. Mickie, thank you so much for being with me tonight live. I really appreciate it. I learned so much. I like I said, I have like a bunch more questions lined up, but you just gave it all. So if you're a small business and you have kind of forgotten about PR, or you thought it was out of your budget, or you thought it was only for Shark Tank type things, this is it. This could be your next strategic move as we talk on strategy talks about PR. So Mickie, thank you so much for being with me tonight. I will be back next week with another episode of Strategy Talks. Bye, everybody.